The truth of the matter is that the Islamic world will never, ever make peace. It's the funniest thing in the world. People in the West are all into peace. Meanwhile, when Israel in previous times had to go into Gaza to stop their terror, so what they find, and this is all over the Middle East, is that they've written on their walls, first the Saturday people, then the Sunday people. Islam, certainly what we call radical Islam, but radical Islam is not radical Islam. Radical Islam is actually traditional Islam. Islam as a group has murdered more people than any other group, more than the communists, more than the Nazis, more than any other group in all of human history. It is based and it's founded on its leader, Muhammad. And Muhammad, if anybody knows anything of Islamic history, and you can check this out every single place because it's clear and it's documented and they're proud of it. Muhammad basically was a warlord. He was a thief, according to one Islamic tradition that I read. In I think his 30 years of leadership, every single year he was involved in 4 skirmishes or wars. Every year, imagine if Moses, who led the Jewish people for 40 years, every year had 4 wars. So you're not talking about a prophet, a leader. You're talking about what we call a warlord, a guy that makes his living off robbing, which is exactly what it says in the Torah about Yishmael. But in any event, what's critical to understand is that groups that go out and murder people obviously have to have some kind of an ideology. They have to have some kind of a philosophy that makes this okay, because everybody knows that it's not okay. So how do you overcome the natural tendency? And the way you do this is exactly what Islam has done. And the sooner the West understands this, perhaps the better off they'll be. And that is that you categorize the other as, first of all, an other. They call it, you demean, you basically disidentify. The reason you would be careful not to hurt another person is because you identify with them. You see them as a person. But the person who looks at another human being and doesn't see another human being, sees, let's say, I don't want to use the word cockroach, but they see a virus, they see evil, suddenly, not only are they not likely to kill them, but they're actually likely to kill them. I'm going to give you an example which shows you how simple this is. There's a tribe in Africa, as we speak, that are a warring tribe, and not only are they a warring tribe, now I lived in Africa, so I've seen this. Not only they're a warring tribe, they actually eat people. And they're actually going around and they're killing and eating people. And so I just told you a story and you perfectly understand that we have to kill that tribe. Now, the story that I told you wasn't true. The point that I'm trying to make is that in 30 seconds, I was able to convince you that there are people that are worth murdering. And it's just that simple. And that this is what the Arabs, this is what radical or traditional Islam believe. And it's quite interesting because according to traditional Islam, there's such a thing called dhimmi, a second-class citizen. There's such a thing called jihad, which is going to war. However, there never was in Islamic history the idea that you should just kill people. Now, to be fair, there was a time, it was called the Almohads. It was about 1,000 years ago, and whoever started the Almohad group in Islam, he had a dream, and that in his dream the Prophet Muhammad came to him and said, this idea of dhimmis, of letting people, Jews and Christians, be second-class citizens, this was only for 500 years. But now you have to come in, and either they convert or they die. It's just that simple. There's no more existing if you're not Muslim. So the idea of murdering people because you're not Muslim, generally speaking, We see here that there were times of exceptions, but generally speaking, they would allow people to be, and even as today, in Iran, which is obviously a radical Muslim country, they allow Jews. I don't know if they allow Christians, but they treat them decently. It's not like they don't treat them decently. So the issue is that there's a new virus in Islam. And this virus, I'm not exactly sure where it started, how it got. I think it's traced to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has what's called Wahhabism. Now, there's 1.4 billion Muslims. Of that, 200 million are Shiites. That's basically Iran, Iraq, and Syria. But the majority, which are Sunnis, got deeply infected by Wahhabism. Now, Wahhabism is kind of if you want to call it, a radical version of Islam. Very intolerant. It's practiced in Saudi Arabia, even though it's becoming a little bit less so with the modern crown prince. So, but the damage has been done. And Islam, I think this is the psychology behind it. Islam has this great goal, as many religions actually, of getting to heaven. And there, I think Muhammad has some kind of a brothel of 72 virgins for wide-eyed virgins, no less. But in any event, this goal of getting to heaven, which many religions have, even though the version of what happens in heaven, I think, is pretty different. So this is very, very interesting, because how do you get to heaven if you can't fight jihad? In the olden days, you would actually fight a war. And if you died, it was called a shaheed, a martyr. You died fighting that war, you go straight to heaven. But what if you'll never win the war? You know, in a time of nukes, you cannot win a war. I mean, in 1 second, if America or Israel wished to, we could literally wipe out every single Muslim country in 1 second. So there's no way that they can win a war. So something else has come up. It's a new way to get to heaven, and that's simply murdering. And one should know that I think most of the murders, there's a website, I'll try to link it, I think it's called Religion of Peace. Unbelievable. It documents every single murder through Islamic terrorism. It's unbelievable. And most of them, I think, are against fellow Muslims, because they have a belief that this guy is not a real Muslim, and therefore I can murder him, and if I die, and literally strap themselves up with bombs. And why are they doing this? Because they think that if I go to heaven, I get all these rewards, and not, in our case here in Israel, it's even worse than that. Quote unquote, the peace partner. This is the non-radical version of Islam in Israel. The Palestinian Authority actually pays. This is funded by Muslims all over the world. Again, there are many good Muslims, but the radical traditional ones, particularly Qatar, nobody should watch that sick channel, because in the end of the day, Al Jazeera, sponsored by Qatar, it's all about the Islamic domination in insidious ways. And the bottom line is that they are paying hundreds of millions of dollars. These guys that are very wealthy from oil money, they're funding all of this murder. They're funding it. And what is the point behind it? The point behind it is nothing less than I guess on one hand, as I'm saying, that the individual thinks that he's going to get to heaven. But on a larger scale, I think it basically boils down to the ego, this Islamic ego. And this is what I was started off with, is that for one group to persecute another group is not that uncommon. It happens all the time. And this comes from our ego. We like to be superior. But you have to have, once you're taking it to the level of murder, you have to have some kind of an excuse. The excuse that they make is the idea that the other is an infidel and he is a kafir. These are actually Muslim terminologies, and this gives them the right to murder. And so the reason you can never make peace with these people is because if somebody sees you in a category that you are automatically a virus, and I gave you that example before, right? So they call Israel or America, the West, the Satan. In other words, they see you as evil. There's nothing that you can do to change that, because they have a religion and they've been brought up in a certain way, and that is how they see you. And Islam is very good at lying. In fact, part of Islam is the idea of, it's called a hunda. Now, a hunda is based on the tradition of Muhammad himself, where he actually made a peace agreement, I think it was with the people of Medina, and then he actually broke that peace agreement. He came and he literally was the role model of terrorism. He burnt down their trees, which provided their food. He killed the men, and he raped the women at that time. As he's killing their husbands, he's raping their wives. And then he steals them as sex slaves. So this is their role model. And so therefore, it's very interesting. I don't know why I think I may be from the only people, because I haven't seen other people say this, maybe one or two. But isn't it interesting that President Obama, who was raised in Islamic countries and understands them, made a hunda? He didn't make a peace deal with the mullahs of Tehran, the, what do they call it? The terrorists. They call it terrocrats. He just gave them more time. And what a hunda is that you make peace. This is literally in their religion. Make peace when you are weak, but it may never be for more than 10 years, because Islam, at least radical traditional Islam, is in a perpetual state of war against every country, including Muslim countries that are not following the Sharia law. And that's why this ridiculous 10-year hunda with Iran was nothing more than buying them the time to actually make the nuclear weapon. Now, why does Iran want nuclear weapons? I don't mean to scare anybody, but I guess it's important. It's crunch time. And that is because they believe, they are Shiites, that when the world will be filled with blood up to a horse's knee, the Messiah will come. So in conclusion, it's like a cancer. The cancer doesn't care that you're healthy. It wants to spread. It doesn't care about you. It will kill you. And unless you kill it first, there's no second chance. And practically speaking, currently, our only rational hope is that Bibi Netanyahu will take out those weapons. America has shown itself to be incapable. Russia has shown itself to be suicidal by helping Iran. And Iran, of course, will nuke them when they want the world to be filled up with a horse's blood up to a knee, with human blood up to a horse's knee, because from the perspective of Iran, Russia is just as much Christian as anyone else, as well as the fact that they are dhimmis and they're kafirs, and last but not least, they don't even care. They're ready to sacrifice themselves because this is their goal. This is what they think is going to bring the Messiah. So this is our currently, from a rational perspective, it says before the Messiah comes, we'll say there's no one to rely on but God. And I think it's time, they say the end is near. I think it's time to say to God, okay, God, I get it. This world, from all practical perspectives, Einstein was smarter than me and you by many times. He says, I don't know what World War III will be fought with, but I know World War IV with sticks and stones. And when he said that, kind of, had I realized that it's not the bomb that kills, but it's the person behind it, better that I should have been a watchmaker than a scientist, because he felt that his talents in developing the atom bomb would be used one day to the negative because there are these people. So in summary, now the one real power we have is to turn to God, because God does have infinite power. But if we don't do that, do not expect on a rational level, from the world that I see, the way I see it, it would be a complete miracle if somehow this danger is stopped. So might as well try to make the miracle happen through giving your life to God in goodness and kindness. And this is not to scare you, but it really is. As it says in the Bible, see, I've placed before you life and death. choose life and a blessing and a curse. The blessing is if you listen to me, and the curse is the opposite. So let's be blessed.